Supreme Court. Section 1, we looked at an overview of the judicial system. Now we're going to be getting into a little bit of details. So let's get started. I just have up here some interesting facts. There are 94 district courts. Within these 94 courts, there's a total of 673 judges. These courts have original jurisdiction. What does that mean? They are the first to hear a case. At the middle tier of our judicial system, we have appeals courts. They have appellate jurisdiction, which means they only hear appeals. We'll get into that later. There's 13 courts of appeals for a total of 179 judges. We also have other specialized courts like the Bankruptcy Court, the Court of International Trade, and so on that handle specialized cases. We'll get to that at the very end of today's video. If you take a look at this chart, you will see that the federal courts handle hundreds of thousands of cases every year. If you look for the latest data, 2018, there were over 325,000 cases pending before the courts. And there were over 275,000 cases filed in 2018. So we're talking hundreds of thousands of cases that are being heard every year by the district courts. As I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, there are 94 district courts. They have original jurisdiction. What types of cases do they hear? If there's any type of case against a foreign government, if there's residents of different states suing each other, the district courts handle that. The district courts also handle violations of federal law. So if there's a federal crime committed, the district courts would hear that. With serious cases, a lot of times the prosecution will use a grand jury. And the grand jury hears the evidence presented by the prosecutor and then decides what crime that person should be charged with. District courts do not hear bankruptcy court. We have a separate court for that. What's that called? The bankruptcy court. Who are the main players within the district court system? Obviously, the judges. We have district court judges, full-fledged district court judges. We also have a type of judge called a magistrate. And a magistrate is kind of like a lower-level district court judge. They handle early hearings, preliminary hearings. They also handle minor criminal cases. And a lot of times they hear civil cases, contractual disputes. We also have judges who have reached what we call senior status. That means they have reached the retirement age, but they still hear cases on a limited basis. So it's kind of like a part-time gig for them. Besides judges, we have court clerks. They handle all the paperwork, all the record keeping for the courts. We have attorneys representing the United States government. We have defense attorneys, and a lot of times those are public defenders for people who cannot afford a lawyer. And then who are the bailiffs for the court system? The U.S. Marshals. We looked at this map in the first video, and every state has at least one district court. If you take a look at Missouri, we have two. We have a Western District Court and an Eastern District Court. If there is no dotted line within a state, that means that state just has one district court. What do the different colors mean? The different colors represent the different courts of appeals. We have 13 courts of appeals, and each one has a jurisdiction. Each one hears appeals from a certain part of the country. For instance, all this purple represents the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals will only hear appeals from Montana, Idaho, Nevada, California, and the rest. Missouri is located in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is right in here. These 7 states make up the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals is the middle tier of our federal judicial system. We have district courts, courts of appeals, and then at the top we have the Supreme Court. They only hear appeals. That's it. They do not retry the case. They only make sure, or they want to make sure, that everything was done correctly. Did the judge allow evidence in that he or she should not have? Or was evidence not let in that should have been let in? Was there a mistake made in the trial process? That's what they look at. Was a law interpreted incorrectly? All those things. They just look at the facts, but they do not retry the case. Keep that in mind. They do not retry the case. Most Court of Appeals are handled by a panel of 3 judges, and those 3 judges make the decision. Every once in a while, a case will be heard by a panel of 11 judges. We call that en banc. And that's 11 judges will hear it. And those are reserved for the serious cases or the most important or most significant cases. The courts of appeals, they hear tens of thousands of cases every year. And most of the time, whatever they decide stands. That's it. They are going to be the final say in over 99% of the time of the cases. The Supreme Court does hear appeals, and there's anywhere between 7,000 and 8,000 appeals from the Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court doesn't hear all those appeals. There's only 9 of them. They can't do that. So they just pick and choose what cases they want to hear. And there's usually about 130 or so cases that the Supreme Court will hear every year, which means most of the time, just about every time, whatever the Court of Appeals says is going to be the final decision. We do have a Court of Appeals called the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. They have nationwide jurisdiction. They are not limited to hearing cases from one specific state or one specific region. But they deal with technical cases, patents, trademarks, international trade, or appeals from the Court of International Trade. And so they're kind of like a specialized court. There's other federal courts. We have the Court of International Trade, the Court of Federal Claims, the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, and the U.S. Tax Court, among others. These are just specialized courts that deal with one specific issue. What does the Court of International Trade deal with? Come on, say it. You can say it. International trade. Veterans claims are heard. Appeals of veterans claims are held by the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Pretty simple to understand. We also have the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. If someone gets court-martialed and they want to appeal that decision from the court-martial, they appeal it to the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. We also have one final court. We call it the FISA Court. Some people also call it the FISC, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. They handle spying issues. And if there's someone in the United States who is spying or is providing aid to another country, the government can go to the FISA court, get a warrant in secret to either search that person's house or to issue wiretaps. But this is done in secret because we don't want, the search warrant to be public record so the terrorist or the spy gets a heads up. So it's done in secret. And we do know who the judges are for the FISA court. We do know where the FISA court is, but the proceedings or what is said in the FISA courts is not just customarily released for the public. And obviously that's for national security reasons. This wraps up our lecture about lower federal courts. With the district courts, we know they have original jurisdiction. They are the first to try the case. And then courts of appeals hear appeals. They have appellate jurisdiction. Hope this helps you understand the lower district courts and be ready for the third video, which is going to be about the Supreme Court. Have a good day.